I guess that's true too. I guess it's a darker side, but it serves the project, right, and not necessarily each individual's interests. And so in that regard, I can look at that and I can say, yeah, it totally makes sense. Like Darth Vader is this iconic
Right.
figure. It's not you. It's not the dude in the suit. In fact, the guy who is the face of Darth Vader, I could kind of care less, and like that could change, you know,
Right.
and it wouldn't change the story for me at all,
No.
or the character for me at all. But on the other side of that, on the just the human resources, being the guy contributing, and then realizing that like my contribution will be completely invisible. I will be stripped from the glory of being the bad guy. Really, at the end of the day, James Earl Jones is Darth Vader,
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, because that voice is what's so iconic and irreplaceable. So I can see, being that guy and feeling snubbed,
Sure. A lot of egos on one set. Yeah. And, what's, I think it was Christopher Lee, the actor who played Saruman in Lord of the Rings. They had filmed a very iconic death scene for him, falling off of the tower and landing and being spiked by some wheel down below. And he was very good friends with Peter Jackson, the director. And it so happens that was actually a falling out moment for them, because it's not George Lucas, because Peter Jackson had to cut it because of cut time, of theatrical time, etc. And Christopher Lee felt very betrayed by that, and they didn't talk for years afterwards, I believe.
Wow.
So yeah.
I mean, isn't that the one that made it into the
extended edition? Yep, it's in the extended edition, but they had to cut it from the theatrical version.
Really? And he was upset about that.
Very upset.
So what happened in the theatrical version? He just fell off? Or just like, I guess it's done.
Yeah, in the theatrical version, I think you just see him on the tower surrounded. I don't think you ever actually see his death. Yeah. So another question, in which movie does George Lucas make a cameo?
It's got to be one of the new ones. I don't remember, but I'm going to say, is he like one of the senators or something in Attack of the Clones?
Yes, he is. He's in episode 3. Not Attack of the Clones. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith.
Okay.
He's a Pantoran senator with blue paint on his body. He really sneaked him in there.
He goes Blue Man Group for his own film.
How much money did Star Wars gross on toys alone between 1977 and 1978?
77 and 78. I'm terrible with this kind of stuff. I'm just going to throw a number out there. I'm going to say it's going to be like 30 million.
$100 million. And this is back in the late 70s.
Yeah.
And that's just on toys alone in about a year. It's wild.
That's wild.
Wildly successful franchise.
Well, they knew the toys were like ticket, right?
Right.
And it goes back to that like kind of upsell model. So I'm going to look at some reference here, by the way, because I'm hitting this point where I'm drawing this over and over, and I'm thinking, you know what? I'm not sure what those little engine nacelles look like. And so this is a part of the discipline of do all these little sketches up front so that you figure it out. Yeah, I've got it. All wrong. It's quite a bit farther back. It was like that. Yeah, so toys. Yeah, it's almost like the DLC market of today, right? Downloadable content. You sell a game, and really the game is a platform to sell more stuff.
Right. Another one. Hoth is the ice planet where when Empire Strikes Back starts.
Yep.
What real life location was Hoth shot in?
That's guess I got to take a guess. Alaska somewhere.
Nope. It's in Europe, Scandinavia. Well, not, yes, Scandinavia. Hardengerjokulen.
Yeah.
Hardengerjokulen Glacier
You go to
in Norway.
Yeah.
And in fact, they had a, you went vacation there last year.
I should have thought.
During their shoot, they had the worst ice storm in 50 years hit the region with negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit temperature. The weather was so bad that a lot of the shots in the movie happened right outside the hotel where they're all staying, and you can't tell the difference because the weather was so horrendous.
That's crazy. So, okay, so was it the plan to have Hoth be a completely barren ice wasteland?
I think so, but I think they were thinking that they were not going to be like almost risking their lives with how bad the temperature and the weather would be.
I mean, I'm not downplaying the risk of life, but
yeah,
I'm also like, what if they had planned for it to be a little bit balanced? You know, it's cold,
right?
Like tundra, and there's some vegetation or whatever,
right?
And then they're like, nope, it's pure white.
Yeah, it's one of those, happenstances that kind of what do you say, mold or create movies. Yeah, I guess
out of their control.
Yeah, I guess art is like that sometimes, whether it's a deadline or a particular set of constraints that is put on you. Have you ever created something that either you're proud of or was unexpectedly turned out in an unexpected way because of kind of third party or unforeseeable circumstances?
So I know that I'm going to struggle to find the exact example and say this is the one time or whatever and tell a story.
Yeah.
But I would say all the time. That's just a norm.
Yeah.
I mean, to the point where it's kind of like an ingrained belief that constraints are what make you more creative.
Yeah.
There's a problem and you got to figure out how to make something work and be interesting and engaging.
Yeah.
In spite of that problem. And then sometimes that problem forces you to do something that you never would have done otherwise that makes the thing unique and special.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So constraints and even environment has a big effect on art. So do you find that in your own drawing, in your own painting? Do you try to create a particular environment in your office or your studio? Or does it just depend? It just kind of happens?
Well, as far as the environment in my studio, that's more of a struggle.
Yeah.
There are times where I want things to be really organized and there's a system and I know where everything is. And then the reality of just I'm trying to do too many things. And, I've got 3D printing and airbrushing and digital stuff and traditional painting and all this stuff in one space. And it all wants its own space, but it can't have it yet,
Right.
And so the bleed over with all that ends up being kind of chaotic. And I would say I don't necessarily thrive in chaos, right? But I'll have to admit that a lot of the time, if you were to come into my office, it would just be stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've heard people say, artists say that they need the chaos, to have too much order just makes it too predictable and rigid. And I don't know how much of this is true,
yeah,
or if it's just, you're just playing the game of the character of what an artist is supposed to be.
Yeah, sure.
But I will say there's definitely truth to it's part office, it's part, artsy, inspiring, visual stuff, and it's part just workshop.
Yeah.
Because you got to make all this stuff, and it's not. A lot of times, it's not going to be neat, and a lot of it, I think, comes down to every project is different, has different demands, so you need you kind of need to pool different resources, and you can't just have like a one size fits all unless you're doing a very systematic, like I paint landscapes. So, like for example, I'm not going to rip on Bob Ross, but take Bob Ross.
Can't rip on Bob Ross.
He does the same thing. He has the same setup. It's very
Sharp,
predictable and straightforward. And sometimes you might introduce some new things or whatever, but there's a system to it.
Where you're doing a lot of different kinds of things.
Right. Particularly because that's the nature of what's going on there. I'm not selling a copy of something. What I'm selling is the service of doing something unique and tailored to the client's need every time, right? So I'm gonna make this one a little extra long there.
Yeah. So one follow-up question on that. I know actors, for example, they want to become the particular character, right? So they'll, lock themselves in the hotel room and pretend to be only that person, demand whenever they're on set that everyone addresses them only by the name of that character, and to talk to them so that they stay in character. Or if it's a tragedy scene and they want tears, they want the tears to be real, so they'll actually work up those emotions in themselves.
They start thinking about.
Yeah. So do you, if you're trying to depict a particular emotion through your art, do you try to mimic or imitate that same emotion in yourself?
Generally, no.
Okay.
Sometimes, yes. It depends on the work, and also the kind of emotion that you're asking about.
Yeah.
Is it big picture or is it finite? Is it that a character has just dealt with tragedy and loss, or are we talking about like it's an epic space battle?
Yeah. So maybe there is that sense of you try to get like dramatic tension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that sort of thing is easier because you just throw on a Hans Zimmer or some kind of like dramatic music.
Yeah. Well, do you actually do that then?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
It depends on the project. But yeah, the more finite things, the more personal, like this character is.
Introspective kind of thing.
No, not so much.
Okay.
You almost kind of have to really work yourself into, like if you're going to do that, you've got to be spending a lot of time on that character or that scene or whatever.
Yeah.
And, sometimes you have to do it in terms, it depends if you're doing like, let's say facial expressions or something, you have to, have to kind of act it out. But I don't find with my work that is very common.
Okay. So another interesting part of Star Wars, to kind of circle back around, is that obviously there's a lot of history that's worked into it. So there's this misconception about where art comes from, or even the nature of creativity. Creativity just ideas just pop into your head out of nowhere, which is not the case. Ideas come from other ideas. The idea of originality is kind of a silly idea. It's really, we take something familiar or several familiar things, we mold them together, we add one particular part to it. That's kind of how creativity works. So when you're creating a character, we'll get into Star Wars and where some of the historical boundaries or the historical inspiration of that came from. But when you're creating a character, what are your common sources of inspiration that you start from?
So common would be a difficult thing, and it kind of has to be tailored to what the character needs to be.
Okay.
So, more broadly, like it's not always character. Sometimes it's characters. Sometimes it's settings or vehicles or whatever. And so there's a program that I use called PureRef, And basically it's just an image. It's just a board. You throw images on it. It's very, very lightweight, and it's just meant for reference imagery. So that is the tool that I'll use. And sourcing material.
Can you describe that a little bit? What was it called again? PureRef?
PureRef.
Okay.
It's just a very lightweight application. It's like, just think gray box. You drag images into it. You can crop those images. You can scale them and move them around, and you can put a note next to it, and that's it.
Okay.
And that, you set that up, and then you just set that off to the side. So generally I'll think, what does this project require me to, like, what does this make me think of? That's one of the first things. So it might not be related to, like, if it's Star Wars, for example, I'm not just going to go look up like other Star Wars stuff. Right?
Yeah, sure.
If there's a specific ask there, like, okay, we're going to do like this scene, for example. One of the first things I think of is this junkyard that I took one of my cars to when it died. And it was called Pick Apart. And I don't know if that's like a common, line of junkyards businesses or whatever. I don't know. Probably not. But anyway, the gist of it was they give you $100 or whatever for your piece of junk, and they come tow it, and it's off your hands. You don't deal with it anymore. They just have a huge lot. They throw all these things there, and then people come through, and for like a very low price, they can just walk through and pull parts off of cars, and then right to the desk and say, "Here's what I got." And they, okay, that's $50, and you walk away.
Yeah.
And so when I think about this scene, that's the first thing I think of. And so that I would pull
personal experiences then.
Yeah. And I would pull reference for that sort of thing. Cars and junkyards, old, classic cars, there's certain things I see in this form that are like, okay, yeah, that's, kind of pulling from that old car design with a really long front hood, for a big engine. At the time, that was kind of what they had.
Yeah.
And, now things are different. So that might start me down another track of like, okay, well, it's not just any car in a junkyard. It's not just a junkyard. It's that era, that design motif, and then like these like engine looking things. That's kind of a certain era of aviation. And so, there's a lot to pull there before you're even like thinking sci-fi, otherworldly type stuff. You're working from grounded reality, things things you've experienced. And actually, I guess that kind of comes back to the question that you asked about, like, do you get in character? Do you have to feel out what they're experiencing? Not necessarily, but the more depth you have in your own experience, the more you can draw from. And I actually think that that's understated. I don't want to go nuts with that one, but it just seems to me that the more interested you are in things outside of your field, the more ammunition you have in your field. Yeah,
I think was it Chris? Are you familiar with Chris Gore? He's an independent film creator, and I think his YouTube channel is Film Threat. Anyway, I think it was him or someone else on Film Threat or Film Courage, one of those, was saying that for young writers to write scripts for movies, it's very difficult because they haven't experienced much of life. Right? So if you're writing about a personal heartbreak or a breakup or a personal tragedy, not that young people have not experienced any of those things, but are less likely to have experienced as many or as in as much detail. So
and certain other factors,
Yeah.
Like if the story, like a heartbreak story or whatever, if it's
Right.
just heartbreak versus
Or betrayal or whatever it is you've experienced. So one of the pieces of advice was, go experience life, like go live life for a while, for 10 years, 15 years, then come back and you'll have something to write about. And keep practicing writing, like don't give that up. But
right.
but you need something to draw on for it to be to feel more real. So you say art, you feel that way to a certain extent with art?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, that kind of reminds me of the book The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield's. One of his major points there being like you show up to do the discipline of the craft so that you are found able and practiced when inspiration comes. I think it's the same thing. Like it's not like, oh, you're too young, don't do anything. Like I wouldn't say that at all. And simply you practice the things that interest you, right? I think that's what has informed me. With my work, it's a lot of just even silly things that over time have interested me. But you give it the time of day and you practice it. Let's see, what should we have? A sand crawler in the background. I mean, I need to look one of these up. It's a pretty basic shape.
So transitioning into some of the historical basis of the movies, where did George Lucas's idea come from? One of them was the space cruiser battles were modeled after old school Navy battles.
Yeah.
Darth Vader's helmet is from a samurai helmet. Obviously, a lot of inspiration from Nazi Germany. Stormtroopers were the names of Hitler's forces. Imperial uniforms of the Empire, very similar to the Nazis' officer uniforms.
Even the proper or like the British accent in the officers.
Oh yeah,
like Empire.
Exactly. The rise from Chancellor to Emperor of Emperor Palpatine, very similar to that of Adolf Hitler. George Lucas said that Palpatine was actually encapsulated or based off of one specific historical figure, but it wasn't Hitler. Do you know who that is?
I'd have to venture a guess. Can't be Napoleon because Palpatine didn't do any of the frontline stuff.
Right.
I wouldn't say Stalin either. Maybe.
Nope. One more hint would be that this person was American.
I mean, so I want to say George Washington is one of our main figures of, someone who rises to power and all that stuff. But there's too much there.
He gave up his power, though.
He gave up his power, and he again was on the front lines.
Right.
He wasn't kind of behind the scenes.
Richard Nixon.
Really?
Yeah. He said George Lucas said that Palpatine was actually Richard Nixon, who went past the Senate in order to start the Vietnam War.
Interesting.
Yeah. So in some ways, the Star Wars trilogy is actually a indictment on the Nixon administration.
Interesting.
Although what's interesting though is that it's obviously not the only theme or the only thing going on. It's a good story. So if you're going to do that type of thing in your art, if you're able to do that subtly, because when you hear it, you're like, okay, I can see that if that was what he was trying to do.
Sure.
But it didn't come across as deliberate. Sure. And forced as a lot of the things today are.
Oh yeah. Well, even at the time, you're thinking about, I'm not a movie buff, so I'm not going to get the timeline exactly right, but not too far off with your other your Stanley Kubrick films of Full Metal Jacket. And those are explicitly political,
right?
Commentary. Art to communicate these ideas and these criticisms.
But people have to actually like the art for it to be effective.
Well, successful. Yeah, that and it has to outlive the immediate crises, right? And I think that's the thing with Star Wars that made it work. Again, I don't know that it's funny because like I want to call it brilliant, and then I also want to say, but it kind of isn't. It's kind of simple, and like the characters aren't super deep. The dialogue isn't super deep, you know?
Yeah.
But I think what makes it work is that it has these like timeless human interactions, these kind of timeless archetypes, right? And that was very much intentional. You know, like that's not just my take on it. You know, Lucas has talked about looking through mythology and finding like the commonalities and saying this is a human story.
Yeah, that's a good versus evil story.
Mm-hmm.
When you go to mythology or other bits of history, obviously the Senate, Republic, and Empire, and a lot of other elements come from the ancient Rome. And obviously you could see the fall of the Republic very much mirrored in the fall of the Roman Republic, and it being eaten up by the Empire with Julius Caesar. And then the Jedi Knights, which is this was something I definitely did not know, are modeled after the Knights Templar. So the Knights Templar had a 12-member council headed by a Grand Master. Sound familiar to the Jedi Knights? They were austere, devoted, and pure. At least that was the perception of the Knights Templar. A similar hooded robe outfit. In 1307, we all remember Execute Order 66. In 1307 AD, France's King Philip IV destroyed the Knights Templar after arresting hundreds of them and tortured and killed them for heresy. So there's even a kind of a mirror there as well. So yeah, a lot of it. Those are only a few. Obviously, I think we could go on for pages and pages of all of the different little historical bits and context, but it does kind of make things richer, and also is a good reminder of, again, creativity. You don't have to come up with things from nothing. Take things from other places, repackage it in an interesting way, and in a coherent, cohesive way.
Yeah. Well, it's not just repackaging. It's I think it's extracting, like, what did you get out of that?
Yeah.
Right? Like, because I get that when I read history, or I'll watch, it's one of my favorite pastimes is to watch YouTube, like breakdowns on different historical battles or like the politics behind it. Because sometimes about Waterloo, but like what were the politics that led up to those events? What's the stuff going on in the background?
Yeah.
And those things are like so interesting to me. And then when you start to dive into it, it's like the light bulb goes on, and well, I guess you just call it inspiration, right? It's like, this really happened, and there's just all these different facets to it, and all this like, betrayal and intrigue and all this stuff. And I think you start to extract that. Like, this is the feeling that I got out of that. This is the value that I see in that.
Yeah.
And that will seep its way into your stories and your art, because that's like what you see and what you care about, what you like, right? And you can't get around that unless you're making art that you hate. You're gonna make stuff that's inspired by your own personal inspiration.
Right. So now we want to transition into something, I call it a draft, which is a lot more lighthearted. And how this goes is there will be a question, and then each of us for 3 different rounds and gets to pick a person, just like you're picking teams in the gym.
Okay.
So the question is this: which Star Wars character would you want to have your back in a fight? So you can go first.
All right. I am tempted to wax long on this. I'll try to keep it. Short answer is going to be Chewbacca.
Okay. Why? Brief answer of why.
Because there isn't yet a long, complicated backstory that makes him like not someone that I could depend on. There's always maybe I'm ripping on it, but like there's always, so I would have said Boba Fett.
Okay.
There's like lots of extra Boba Fett stuff.
Oh yeah.
I don't know about that guy. Give me Chewie. He's pretty straight up,
Yeah.
All right, you?
Yoda. I think if it was Yoda versus Chewie in a fight, I think I would take Yoda. So I think.
I think that's a bad pick.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, Chewie didn't like punk out and go to a planet and live in a igloo.
No, that's true. He didn't have a mental breakdown or whatnot.
When
But
they hated him the most, he was like, "I better leave."
it's true. But in his prime, I would take Yoda over Chewie. All right, your go. Second round.
Round two. I hadn't thought that far ahead. He's a bad pick. I don't know if I should go with it, but I'm thinking IG-88. He's the droid with the tall can head.
Oh,
So
in the Mandalorian.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So the assassin droid.
yeah. He's in the originals when Darth Vader is hiring bounty hunters to get Han Solo
No, interesting.
so that he can get to Luke, right?
Yeah.
And that's when he, has that iconic line with Boba Fett, "No disintegration." And IG-88 is in that lineup. Bosk is another one. He's a big dinosaur-looking guy. I always liked him as a kid. Like, yeah, dinosaur bounty. Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
But we'll go with IG-88. He's and I like him from another story, one of the video games, Jedi Knight Dark Forces 2. It's an old video game, but IG-88 was like the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm tempted to go with my second pick, Darth Vader. Although I'm a little bit hesitant because if I had served my purpose, then he would turn his back on me and willingly sacrifice me. But if he truly had my back and I could depend on him, I think that would be a pretty solid pick in a fight.
I had your back. Like, I've never seen Darth Vader choke anybody from behind. But as soon as you were, as soon as you slip up, and he's like,
Exactly. So that's why there's definitely reservations about that pick, but I'm not going back.
okay, I'm too simple-minded. I'm drawing Jawas, so I'm thinking a Jawa might be nice.
Yeah, you can.
What's the context again? We're doing in a fight.
In a fight, who would you want to have your back?
What kind of fight is this? Is this a Star Wars fight, or is this
Star Wars fight.
or this?
So there's lasers and lightsabers and
So I've got
Yeah.
Chewie, IG-88.
I have Darth Vader and Yoda. Yeah.
I guess I've got a Luke Skywalker. You get
Okay.
Jedi.
Yeah. Okay. And if I'm going to choose a non-Jedi,
Well, we should have said Jedis are off the tip. Next round.
yeah, maybe, yeah. I think I would go with Boba Fett. Minus, I do understand your reservations, the concerns with him. And that's why he'd be third round pick. But as far as a non Jedi, he's pretty great. I mean, he killed several Jedi as well. I mean, he's pretty good.
Okay. I think it's
He's able to fly and all that with his
a bit of a
jetpack.
shame that despite all of our efforts in storytelling to make Boba Fett even cooler, he's now a third round pick where he would have been like number one.
Oh, I know. I know, and it was all because of that. The book of Boba Fett, unfortunately, undid a lot of the mystique and the.
So
He was such a cool bad guy. Now he's like soft-hearted. I was like, I don't want a soft-hearted. I want him to be bad guy with a sense of the moral, right?
right.
Well, yeah,
I will admit that I have not seen the book of Boba Fett.
yeah, you're not watching much.
I watched one scene.
Yeah.
Somebody showed me the rockabilly gang on their little bike,
Yeah,
and I was like, "This is not for me."
no,
I'm pretty sure I'm not going to enjoy this.
it was made for the modern audience, but not for you. Okay. We're about 8 minutes to the end here. So I wanted to touch on one more serious kind of segment, but before we do that, tell us about your drawing. Where are you at with it, and what's your next steps?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I actually am pretty happy with this, the positioning and the composition that I have here. So we got a little Jawa here. He's kind of reaching down inside what would be the engine compartment that we've got opened up. We're trying to open up a bunch of panels. I've removed the windshield here, and
Okay.
this is just like the front dash, which probably could be simplified. And I would probably just do that with like a light gray, just the whole section. Couple of Jawas around here, the parts kind of separated, and then this back here is a little, it's just abstract, but this is it's supposed to be a Jawa holding up a part here.
Okay.
And so at this stage, I'm still only working with a C3. So
It's C3 is marker.
yeah, so the scale here, these are gray. C stands for cool gray, so it's slightly on the blue side. And so a 0 would represent nothing. That's the white page. 1 would be a 10% to black. 100 would be a black. So pull the 100 right there.
Okay.
So that's a
So the 3 is the shade.
yeah. So it would be
The
30%.
0 white.
Yes.
0 is white. 100 is black.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're still only at 30% here towards black, but I want to be careful. Experience has told me you keep this section of the drawing really light, and then when you come in with the black, everything gets really punchy, right?
Yeah.
But we're kind of doing a build up here because I'm working solely in marker and not with pencils. I have to kind of get my block in, like the general shape of what I want to see.
Yeah.
And then I do a second pass where I start to refine and define things, but I'm also thinking a little bit about shading at that point, not too much, because I don't want to get locked in with, what's that line from Napoleon Dynamite? I spent 3 hours shading your upper lip, wrote it,
Yeah.
well, it's true. It can happen. So what you want to do is be thinking really mainly about the forms, defining really what I'm seeing. You start with abstract shape, and I think that's where the image has its strengths, is in like what are the major shapes. Is, for example, we've got these Jawas, they reference each other, but what we need to do is have a little bit of diminishing sizes here, so that will give us variety. It would also give us scale.
Okay.
And so if they're all on an equal plane and they're all equal size, it's kind of boring. Another way you can get around that is you can lump them together. So I've put like 2 Jawas here, and I could even maybe put in a third, right? Maybe he's handing a part down to someone down here. Right, and so now you've got this, like, this all reads as one cluster, as one shape, rather than like these individual elements that are just kind of laid on the page in a boring way. So that's the stuff that I'm looking at up front, because it's hard to fix that stuff later.
Okay.
So then the next step would be to come in with black, and for that I've got more than 2 sizes, but the basic sizes are going to be a 0.7 millimeters. So that's actually a pretty big marker. And then my 0.05 is a tiny little detail.
Okay.
And again, with the variety in size of the shapes, the variety in the stroke thickness, that's what they call your line. The variety in the stroke will make it more visually interesting.
Okay.
So I'm going to start with the thicker one.
Cool.
And how much time do we have? Just a few minutes?
3 minutes, but I guess we can finish in our post-production meeting.
Okay. Looks like I grabbed the small one.
In fact, the last segment is definitely going to take more than 3 minutes, and I think it's good to end on time. So I think we'll end it there. Next week, we're planning on doing another Star Wars themed one. We have topics such as what is the inspiration for artists from Star Wars? Why is it so popular? And why has it inspired so much art, kind of as a work of generative art, and some other topics as well. So thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for listening, and have a great week.